Hi, everyone. Welcome, students, teachers, and parents. Welcome to the Critical Conversations panel hosted by RISE and the Buffalo Sabres. RISE and the Buffalo Sabres are thrilled to be able to offer the Diversity Foundation's resource during this time. Today, I'm delighted to be able to introduce you to Ian Cutler with RISE as your host for today's event.
Thanks so much, Ashley, and thank you everyone for taking time to join us today. We're really excited to be here. I'm Ian Cutler. I'm with RISE. I'm the Senior Director of Communications and host of Champions of Change, the RISE podcast. RISE is a national nonprofit that uses sport to combat racism and unite diverse communities. We educate and empower athletes and executives across all sports at all levels. So leagues like the NHL, NBA, NFL, but also high schools, colleges, and so on, equipping them with the necessary skills to be leaders for social justice and racial equity. You can learn more about RISE on our website, risetowin.org. We're here today because our country has experienced an unprecedented reckoning on race over the last year, with more publicized killings of unarmed Black men, women, and children, including in communities across Western New York. Athletes and others in the sports community helped ignite a desperately needed national conversation about race, injustice, and inequity that has caused many people and organizations to reflect and ask themselves what more they could do to create more diverse and inclusive workplaces, schools, and communities. So today we're going to be joined by a panel of athletes and about 120 high school students and teachers across the Buffalo area to discuss issues of race and diversity within the sport of hockey, as well as potential next steps to make the game more diverse and inclusive. We'll also talk about the role of sports in creating social change and how we can all become leaders for ending racism and advancing social justice in our own communities. So let's meet our esteemed panel today, starting with Jean-Luc Grand-Pierre. He's a studio analyst for the Columbus Blue Jackets and a former NHL defenseman. Jean-Luc made his NHL debut with the Sabres in the 98-99 season and would go on to play in 269 career NHL games with Buffalo, Columbus, Atlanta, and Washington. Michelle Picard is a RISE Group 1001 fellow and a former member of the United States women's national hockey team. She won a silver medal at the 2014 Winter Olympic Games in Sochi and played in 5 IIHF World Championships for Team USA, winning gold 4 times. She also played professionally for 3 years at the National Women's Hockey League for the Metropolitan Riveters and was most recently the NWHL Deputy Commissioner. Finally, we have Damari Johnson. He's a 10th grade student at South Park High School in Buffalo. Damari recently participated in a multi-week RISE leadership program with the Buffalo Bills, which brought together 4 Buffalo area high school football teams from different socioeconomic areas over the course of 8 weeks to educate and empower student athletes and coaches to be leaders for addressing matters of racism, prejudice, diversity, and inclusivity within their teams, schools, and communities. So let's get started and just talk about why we're here and why this is even an important platform to have these types of conversations. Jean-Luc, maybe you can start us off and let's just talk about the power of sports, right? Why is sport such an important vehicle to bring about social change and combat racism?
Oh, Ian, that's a great question. I think for me, I always saw sport as an escape, almost from real life, whether it was from school or things going on at home. It seems to me like whether I played soccer in the summertime or hockey in the winter times, for me, it was just a nice escape from reality. And you don't realize it until you retire that, having been lucky enough to play professional sport, it is an escape from real life until the real world comes knocking and says, hey, this is not how real life is. So for me, sport was a great escape, and I think for any kid, it doesn't matter what it is. I think sport is a great way to not only like create real friendship, because it seems obviously there are incidents no matter where you are with other teams, but for me, never had any racial problems with teammates or anybody within my organization in all the years growing up. And, yes, I was in a multicultural bed growing up in Montreal, Canada, where, there was Black, Indians, whites, Italian, Greek people on my team year after year. So it was great exposure for everyone as well. So anyway, there's nothing I can say about sport that didn't change my life. So for me, it was the number one thing for me was really a great escape from reality.
Michelle, what do you think? Why is sport such an important platform to have these types of critical conversations about race and social justice and ending racism?
Athletes are people that that people look up to, and so they can set the tone, and sort of if they're having these conversations or taking certain actions, people will see that, respect that, and hopefully follow along as well. So I think athletes, especially pro or international athletes, like have that sort of ability to spark that sort of larger impact.
I believe that it brings a lot of people together. It could build like a lot of friendships and bonds, and just like really bringing a lot of people together from like different cultures, different countries, things like that.
Totally. I kind of mentioned at the top just about everything that's gone on over the last year, right? We had so many unfortunate visual examples of systemic racism and inequity that were, whether it was, with unfortunate police shootings, or whether it was, just things that were highlighted by the pandemic as far as inequities in resources and education. It really caused a lot of people to see what exists as far as racism and inequity. So I wonder if just the experience of the past year has changed you at all in seeing the way you see yourself as making a difference in this space. How have the events of the past year kind of forced you to reconsider the role you play in addressing issues of racism and social justice?
I think it puts a little bit of a spotlight on the situation of the climate, I guess, that the United States is in right now. And I'm not gonna lie, my parents are still in Canada, and my mom called me multiple times asking if I was okay, if I was safe. And it's like, you just realize, especially for me as a parent now that I have kids, I did talk to my son about things like that, and just make him a little bit more aware of what's going on around the world. But for me, I think like Michelle said, athletes, especially like superstars, right? People that people look up to on a nightly basis on ESPN, the LeBron James, the big names, they have an even bigger role than you, I, and Michelle and Damari. Although we still can do our small part. When you have somebody that has, I don't know, 50 million followers on Twitter or on Facebook, they take a lot of that charge, but us as individuals also have to do something. So am I aware of it? Much more than I ever was, absolutely. And, what can I change? For me, I just look at it as like, and it sounds kind of cheesy, but it's really respecting everyone and treating everyone the way that you want to be treated. And that's how it can all start.
Michelle, what do you think?
I mean, I think for me, it caused a lot of reflection on sort of my experience and thinking about and some of my teammates that I'd played with, and not really being super aware of maybe some of the things that they were dealing with when they're outside of our locker room. And so just awareness there, but then also thinking about myself and my role as a coach and where I was with the NWHL. And it's just, what more can I be doing? How do we help? How do we support? And so, I was just sort of thinking, just I guess a call to action more than in reflection.
Yeah. Jean-Luc, you mentioned just how, superstars, LeBron James, all those, big time athletes really have that ability to affect change. But you also mentioned that, each of us in our own way can do something like that too, right? Whether you're, especially with student athletes, right? Like, Damari, you can speak firsthand. I'm sure you're probably one of the more well-known kids in your school, maybe, for playing football. So, you have a power, you have an influence on your community, whether that's, your peers, your teachers, your family, your friends, etc. They look up to you just because of your role as an athlete. And so I think it's important to recognize that you do have that ability to create change and affect change and inspire people to come together and address these issues. And Damari, I call you out because you did participate in this Rise Leadership Program with the Buffalo Bills this year with other high school teams across the region, learning about these issues of racism and social justice and how you can use your platform in a way to address them. I wonder what your biggest takeaway was from that experience, and what did you learn about being a leader for diversity, equity, and inclusion?
My biggest takeaway was that as us teenagers, we also have a strong voice that we can also speak up for what's right. And something that being a good leader is recognizing people's worth and just recognizing people as it is, respecting people, just like really being like a good person to someone, not beating them down, not just based off their culture, how they look, what color your skin, being family to that person.
And what about leadership, Damari? I mean, I know that's such an important thing, right? We talk about, like we just said, about how you could be a role model and people look up to you. But what's something about leadership that you learned from that experience?
So like me, I have an impact on a lot of people because yes, I do play football. So I have a lot of impact on people. So by me doing something positive and right, I see that a lot of people that follow after me do what's right. They don't do negative or they don't do things that could get them in trouble. They also follow the rules or they also follow that positive way.
Absolutely. It's, when we have these types of conversations, it's so important to be open and honest and really vulnerable when you're talking about issues of race in order to really help people understand like the true impact that these types of issues have. So I wonder if maybe you all would be comfortable just sharing some kind of example of ways that you've seen, witnessed, lived, experienced some form of racism or discrimination. Maybe it's gender discrimination or something else, just so we can really, have that understanding and really grasp what these issues are all about. Michelle, I wonder if maybe you could start us off there and just share an example from your lived experience about a time you faced racism or discrimination.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been pretty fortunate in my personal experience in terms of having positive experiences, but one story sort of sticks out. And so I grew up playing hockey from the time I was really young, but and this story came out like when I was older. Thank goodness, I don't know how I would have taken it, but I was playing like mite hockey, which for those who don't know, that's like you're 6 years old, my first year playing team, and it was all boys, and the only girl. And I had a great experience. I had no idea. Like my coach was great. Like all of my teammates. I was just a kid playing hockey, and I found out like a couple, like I don't know, when I was older, that my coach's family and like my family had become friends. And at one point, like over dinner or whatever, he had said like he was worried about having a girl on his team because like they just assumed that I was bad. I wasn't bad, but
Well, clearly not.
like,
I mean, you played in the Olympics, so.
Yeah. So he had that preconceived notion. I mean, then I was an Olympian, right? I was just a little kid out there, but, right. but I guess like my point of that, and like when I was really thinking about it, was like he had this thought because I was a girl and that I couldn't play or wasn't going to be as good. But I proved him wrong. But it's like I shouldn't have to prove him wrong, nor should anyone who's not the typical, like, I guess for hockey right now, it's like a white male is sort of like what's thought of for hockey. So if like you're not fitting in that mold, are you automatically sort of discounted? And so I think about the impact that maybe has on older players who are being selected for teams. And like if they stick way out, right, like there's probably not a question. But when you're making those final decisions, and like, are you sort of already maybe counting someone out because they don't fit who you think should make a team or plays hockey or whichever. So I just think about that story, and sort of as a mite playing, I had no idea, but the impact maybe, as kids get older or when the stakes are a little bit higher.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. Maybe Jean-Luc, maybe you can share. I know you mentioned that it wasn't something that you experienced much as a hockey player, but I wonder if you could just share just going through life, if there's anything that sticks out to you.
Yeah, for me, it was actually in hockey. It was probably 12, 13 years old at the time. And, you're a teenager and you think you're invincible. And it's like, there's not much to worry about in life when you're 12, 13-year-old. And way back in the days that there wasn't. And we were at a hockey tournament, and, we were on one of the shuttle buses. Somehow they had like 2 teams per bus to get to the arena. And the team we're going to play against, when I walked on the bus, somebody said like some racial comments to me as I walked by, and I remember like I felt like I was my confidence went from here, and just by the words, it took me all the way to the bottom, and I was not crying visibly, but like it was pretty interesting to see the response, right? So, and that's one of the things for me that really changed not my life, but my outtake on the support of a team, right? Playing a team sport and having the support of your teammates. I would say probably 10 to 12 of my teammates came to my defense immediately and basically berated that poor kid bad enough that, like he was the one crying by the time we were done. But it was just, for me, that's, we talked about sport and what it does to you. It basically puts around you an entourage of people that are going to have your back. And, for me, I was the only Black kid on the team. So it's not like, I was all the other Black guys on my team came to my defense. It was just teammates because, we had that self-respect for each other, no matter what race you were. We were all there to have fun and do a job on the ice. And so for me, that was one of the experiences that really stuck with me. There I am at 44 still talking about him. But to me, I took the negative from that experience and turned it into a positive. And that's something that stuck with me for a long time. And, I hope the Mari don't get to go through experiences like that. But if it happens, just, think of it as, and any other kid watching right now, things will happen and they should not happen. But just think of like the positive outcome from an event like that. Because for me, it gave me motivation really for the rest of my life. And it was not hate like, oh, I don't like white people, I'm going to be the best. It was literally like, you know what, here's one more thing that's going to be like pushing me every day to wake up and do the right thing out there, whether it's on the ice, in school, or in life.
Oh, that's great. Thanks so much for sharing that. And, I'm glad that you were able to turn that into a positive. Like you said, obviously it's a challenge that you shouldn't have had to face, but one that unfortunately does exist in today's world as well. I wonder maybe if you could just expand a little bit about your experience as a person of color in a majority white sport. And just throughout your career. I know you mentioned you never really faced specific like kind of racial taunts or anything from teams at the NHL level. But I wonder if maybe you could just expand a little bit more about that. Just like you said, being sometimes the only Black player on a team, and just what that's like for you, and what do you hope that today's generation can learn from some of your experiences?
For me, honestly, Ian, I would say it as I've never, and it's gonna sound weird, I've never saw color as something that like, oh, you know what, oh, he's Black, I'm gonna hang out with him, he's white, I'm not, or vice versa. I grew up in a neighborhood, like I said, that had all kind of cultures, so it was pretty open and acceptance. I never had any incident. So for me, I look at it as no matter what it is, you need to give everybody a chance, right? So it's not because somebody is of a certain religion, sex, or whatever sexual orientation that you have to say, well, that's not what I am, and you're out. So because I went to Europe, I played in Europe for multiple years, and I saw the climate there, and it was funny because when I went to Sweden, I was the only Black person in the whole city that I was in, pretty much, because it was a small town. And, people were very accepting. It doesn't matter like if you were white, Black, or, Puerto Rican. It was just like a completely different climate compared to what you see in the United States, where sometimes you'll see just like that look, right? And it's, I don't know if it's something that is in the culture here, but, you go to a country where it's probably 99% Caucasian, and somehow there's less racism there than we have here, where it's like almost 50-50. So it's really an entire culture that needs to change. But the good news is I feel like the younger generation is much more accepting than the old dinosaurs like me that are in our 40s. And, I see it on a daily basis when I go talk to school and stuff like that. And to me, that's a really good sign. Because, on the news, you hear about all the negative, but there's so much positive right now, especially with the younger age kids. And to me, that gives me hope.
Yeah. And, even like you said, just getting that look, I mean, that's enough in my mind as an example of just an experience that is discriminatory, right? Like, because it's not just, it may not be like a taunt, it may not be, a misopportunity, but even just you not feeling comfortable in your own space. And I think when we talk about like creating an inclusive culture and inclusive environment, that's an important piece of it, is just for you to feel comfortable and for everyone to feel comfortable about who they are and comfortable in being able to embrace their own identities, and not have to worry about things like that. So, again, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's an important thing for people to learn and understand too. I want to talk a little more about hockey itself. And just some of the other challenges that exist within the sport as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We talked about, obviously, Michelle, you had an issue with gender discrimination, and I don't think that's unique to hockey. I'm sure that, in across all sports, if you were a girl on a boys team, you may have faced a similar situation, unfortunately. And then, we're talking about just the majority white sport that is hockey. So we're talking about trying to grow the game and help create a more inclusive hockey culture. What do you think, Michelle, can be done to do that? Right? How can we create more diversity, more equity, more inclusion within the game of hockey?
I think I think it gets talked about a lot in terms of like seeing it to be it, or having the role models. And so what are we doing at the higher, I sort of touched on it before, but like what are we doing at the higher levels in terms of hiring or our scouting or things like that to really make sure we're giving everyone a fair look, to either have those positions in the highest levels and in terms of in leagues and teams and organizations, but like in terms of players getting fair looks with tryouts and moving up the ladder and things like that. So that way we can showcase more diverse stories and players and people involved in the sport of hockey. And I think too, what a challenge for hockey is that, and it's so hard to start late. Like the way that it's, at least sort of my experience is that like if you don't start when you're 6, 7, 8 years old, like people sort of like don't bother. And so I think that probably turns away a lot of kids because maybe you play, I don't know, floor hockey in gym class in middle school or high school and want to start hockey, but there's no like beginner or no sort of rec things once you're sort of outside of 8, 9 years old. And so I think then it ends up with, there's a lot more kids who don't end up playing. And so if there's a way to figure out how to change that, and more ways to have rec hockey at older levels, I think you'll start to see a lot more different, like more diverse people playing the game, just because there's more points of access other than when you're 6 or 7 and you just hope that mom or dad decides to sign you up.
That's great. Jean-Luc, what do you think?
So my parent immigrated from Haiti, so all they knew was soccer and track pretty much. And when they came to Canada, I was born in Montreal. It was, it was really about my surrounding, and it's like it's a culture there. Everybody plays, hockey, so it was an easy thing for them to sign me up. Although both my parents knew nothing about the sport, they just signed me up into a sport, and hockey was the one. But what I see in the U.S., like Michelle said, it's tough unless your parents put you in early to start. No kid that's like 6, 7 year old is going to say, hey, sign me up for hockey. It's really something that your parents pretty much get you going into. And until hockey gets more exposure, and by exposure, I mean, we're talking about minorities, like until you see another, a Jerome McGinley or like a Connor McDavid that is like, a black player, it's going to be hard to really market the game to minorities, because if you look at an NHL game any given night, you might be lucky to see one black guy. So that sense of inclusion may be a little bit harder for people of color. And that's the way that I see it compared to, in Canada. It doesn't matter if you're a girl or boy, black. I mean, you're playing hockey because that's the sport. Just like, in Columbus here, it is football, right? But the advantage with football is you can start at 14 years old and not have a problem making the varsity team a couple of years later, because the skills required for football, not that they're not high, but with hockey, that skating, we're talking thousands and thousands of hours just to be, a good skater. And we're not even talking about puck skills there.
Yeah.
So that's the main difference. So unless you start early, it's really, really hard to, see guys make it to the next level, to the professionals. But you know what? They still can play in high school and have some fun. So for me, I think growing the sport can start at any age. It's just that, unfortunately, it happens to be a sport that has become extremely, extremely expensive. I talk to some parents sometimes, and they're telling me they're dropping $15,000 to $20,000 a year on one kid to play hockey. To me, it just makes zero sense, because as expensive as hockey is, it really turned into a business now, and it makes it really, really hard for younger kids that don't necessarily have the needs, and even parents that have money. Like, it's just a lot of money and a lot of time commitment, especially here in Columbus. Buffalo, not so much travel, but here, if you want to play competitive hockey and you're 12, 14 years old, every weekend you're traveling to St. Louis, to Chicago. I mean, we're talking 4, 5, 6, 7 hour drives just to go see your kid play one game. It's a lot of commitment. And that's why when you see these guys go pro, they thank their parent for giving everything they could. It's, they're mortgaging their house, for their kids to live their dream. And that's really unfortunate.
I think you're right, in a lot of ways that it's all about barriers for entry and whatnot, and also starting at that young age. Just as an aside, you mentioned like this how hard it is to skate. Like sometimes when you're watching a hockey game, I just forget that they're actually skating too. They're not just running, like it's so smooth, and to get to that level, it really takes a long commitment. So that definitely can appreciate that. Kind of expanding on what we were talking about just now, Jean-Luc, I mean, we talked about so what can we do to grow the game and make it more inclusive? So focusing on hockey. But what about how can like a league like the NHL or a team like the Sabres, obviously they've done this with this great diversity foundations program, but what is it that these kind of big organizations in the sports world, what can they do to help advance these issues of inequity and social justice and inclusion in their communities? Right. So not just focusing on growing the game and making that more inclusive, but just using their platform as an influence as an organization to impact their communities that they serve.
So as a team, I think it's funny. So it's a lot of teams in the NHL are almost like a little too corporate. And, I'm choosing my word here, but if you look at the NBA is a different story. You can see the commissioner doesn't mind for the players to really speak their minds. It's like, what? If that's how you feel, do it. We're canceling the game. You guys don't want to play. Go ahead. That's fine. And the NHL is a little bit behind this because, again, I don't think there are any players of colors that have a voice really big enough to get everybody on the same page, because it's not going to come from the ownership. It's not going to come from the commissioner. It's going to have to come from the players themselves. And if you look at the NBA and the way these guys have such a voice compared to even like the NFL, it's amazing, because I think the NFL, like the ownership is still somewhat making sure that everybody stays in line compared to the NBA, where the superstar really have a real voice. So for hockey, I think it has to start with community outreach, with teams. And I think they're doing a good job as far as, getting hockey sticks to community, get them introduced to the sport, whether it's getting the kids to the game. And that's another thing. Hockey is probably the worst sport to watch on TV. If you look at baseball, basketball, and football, the hockey game, on TV, it's okay. But when you go to a live event, it's by far the best sport. And even myself as a professional,
I was going to say, you're a TV analyst for a hockey team.
Yeah,
so you might want to be careful with what you say, John.
Yeah, but I'm being honest. It's unbelievable how growing up, I never really watched hockey on TV. I never did, because it's not the same. Once you go into the building and you understand the sport, that's when you start watching it on TV. But nobody really is going to casually put hockey and say, hey, let me see about this sport and understand it. It's really a sport that, unfortunately, you fall in love when you go to one game, and then now you got to start watching it on TV. And how do you get to grow the game? You need to get these people into the building. So that's, for me, I think that's the biggest thing, because Columbus was not a big hockey market, and you wouldn't believe how many people play the game here. Actually, the adult league in Columbus is the second largest in the United States after Minnesota. And it's not because people grew up playing hockey. It's literally, they went to a Blue Jackets game, they fell in love, start playing. And we've seen the high school teams grow. We saw the men's hockey, women's hockey grow just because of, people going into the building. So I think as a team, that's what you need to do. Get people in the building, let them fall in love with the sport, and then they'll follow.
Michelle, what do you think, as far as, again, not necessarily talking about just what it takes to can make the game itself more inclusive, but just how the game and how a league and a professional team, this could be hockey, this could be any other sport really too. How can these teams and leagues use their platforms and influence to impact communities in a way that advances social justice?
Yeah, I mean, I think about, I guess, like USA Hockey has, like, every year for coaches and officials, like, you've got to go. So I guess I'm thinking about this in a different way, but you have to go through every year, like a seminar, or get some sort of like your USA Hockey number. But in order to coach or be a ref, like, you have to do this. And it's sort of an educational thing. It's sort of professional development, like all that kind of stuff. And I'm wondering what kind of opportunity that provides to like every coach and every official in USA Hockey does this every year. So what opportunity is there to have more either education, more conversations, or more training to be able to, like, if situations arise, that so that they can handle it. So making sure that like when people do try to play hockey, and we're making sure that it is an inclusive place, they want to keep playing hockey. So I think about that from a like, what can we do with coaches and officials and organizations in general. But I guess that's from a sort of a top-down perspective.
Yeah. And how about, I want to kind of talk about just what people can do. Like, so you're not an athlete, you don't play hockey. And, or I shouldn't say you're not a professional athlete, you don't play hockey. And Damari, I want to come back to you, just thinking about what people can do who are maybe in your position, right? Like you're a student, you're a high school football player. What's something that people who don't have that big platform of a professional athlete or a professional team can do to actually make a difference and make inclusion a priority in their lives, in their schools, in their communities? As a young person, what's a step that you can take and what you'd encourage other people to take?
What we talked about on the rise, you can help your community. You can help like a lot. Like you help old citizens. You can volunteer work to help out your community. You can do a lot to help your community, like a lot.
And what do you think, maybe Michelle, just are some examples of things that people can do just on their everyday lives that can look to advance social justice issues and combat racism?
Being willing to talk with teammates who maybe have different backgrounds, different experiences than you, or there's someone new to your team or school or whichever, making sure you're just saying hi or waving in the hallways or in the locker rooms. I think something like that can go a long way, especially at, when you don't have all the followers and things like that.
Jean-Luc, what do you think?
It's so hard to pinpoint it because if we could, it would have been done already. So, you walk around and you see people with their sign in their yard and like, it says, it's a Caucasian family and says, Black Lives Matters and stuff. Yeah, it's easy to put a sticker or, a sign in your yard and say, hey, look at me. But I think at the end of the day, it's really about how people act in their daily lives. And how do you change that? I have no idea. And that's the $1 million question right now. If there was an easy way, it would have been done. But for me, I think it starts at the top, right, with government, and it starts with people that have a voice, and us as an everyday citizen. All we can do is our best. But I don't have an answer really for that because it's a really tough question.
Yeah, no, it's hard. And I think, a lot of it goes back to like kind of what you were saying, Michelle, about having conversations. And I want to get to one question that we have submitted here. And then we'll wrap up after this. But I think this is an important question. Is just, as an ally, Michelle, in the fight against racism, as a white woman, what is something that you can do, right? When you kind of witness or experience some kind of incident of racism, how would you interject and intervene, and what advice would you give to someone who may witness a similar situation like that?
Yeah, I think stepping in and intervening, or checking if it's someone that or checking in with that person after the incident, after it happens. I think Jean-Luc, you talked about your when your teammates came to rally behind you when you were getting on the bus. So just being willing to step in and stop it, or if you're not like in the moment able to, but checking in with that person and just being like, hey, like I'm here, like happy to listen, and let them have the space to talk and share whatever it is that they're feeling. Yeah.
And I think something else that's really important for people to realize is that when we talk about, what can you do in your own community? What are some actions that you can take? And, I think, a lot of it comes down to education too, right? And it's understanding about recognizing, who you are and your identity, and acknowledging, taking that perspective of other people, right? Using that skill of empathy, perspective taking to really understand where someone else might be coming from or their lived experiences, and taking the time to learn about that and to get to know them and to really understand what other people live through, so that you can then be better educated and really better equipped to address those issues when you face them head on. So that is all the time that we have today. I want to thank Jamari for joining us from South Park High School. I want to thank Michelle for joining us as an Olympian. What an amazing thing that you did, and you get to contribute that here. And Jean-Luc, professional NHL player, TV analyst for the Columbus Blue Jackets. I can't thank all three of you enough for taking time to join us here on this Rise Critical conversation with the Sabres and EVERFI. So thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.